The moments that define our lives rarely announce themselves with fanfare or warning. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days, before revealing themselves as the precise instant when everything we thought we knew about ourselves and the people we love transforms irrevocably. For me, that moment came at my 8-year-old daughter's birthday party when my sister-in-law looked at my child with complete indifference and uttered words that would shatter 2 decades of family dynamics in a single afternoon. The party itself had been weeks in the making, and if I'm being honest with myself now, I should have recognized the warning signs long before that catastrophic day arrived. But hindsight carries a clarity that present moment anxiety often obscures, especially when you're trying desperately to maintain peace in a family that has spent years teaching you that your needs, your children's safety, and your own instincts matter less than keeping everyone else comfortable. My daughter Lily had been counting down the days to her 8th birthday with the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that only children possess. She had circled the date on our kitchen calendar with bright pink marker, adding little hearts and stars around it. Every morning she would check how many days remained, her excitement building with an intensity that made my heart ache with love. I wanted this day to be special for her, not extravagant or ostentatious, just genuinely happy. A gathering of family and friends, some carefully selected treats she could safely enjoy, and the simple pleasure of feeling celebrated on her special day. But in my husband Michael's family, nothing is ever simple when his sister Brittany becomes involved in the planning process. Brittany has spent her entire adult life positioning herself as the family's premier event coordinator, tastemaker, and self-appointed arbiter of what constitutes appropriate celebrations. She doesn't suggest ideas for gatherings. She commandeers them entirely, transforming what should be collaborative family moments into showcases for her own vision and, more recently, her fledgling party planning business. When Lily's birthday approached, Brittany immediately inserted herself into the planning with the subtlety of a bulldozer crashing through a paper wall. Before I could even finish mentioning that we were thinking about having a small party, she had already begun making pronouncements about themes, catering options, and decoration schemes. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine on the surface, almost generous, but there was an underlying current of control that made my stomach tighten with apprehension. Michael and I discussed it privately, one evening after the girls had gone to bed. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, turning my coffee mug in slow circles, while trying to articulate the discomfort I felt without sounding ungrateful or paranoid. Michael listened with that particular expression he wears when discussing his family, a mixture of resignation, defensiveness, and something that looks uncomfortably like defeat. He suggested that perhaps letting Brittany handle some of the planning would actually reduce my stress, take some responsibilities off my plate. But what he really meant, what I could hear beneath his carefully neutral tone, was that refusing Brittany's involvement would create conflict he didn't want to navigate. The path of least resistance in Michael's family has always been allowing Brittany to have her way, and Michael had been walking that path his entire life. So I agreed, against every instinct screaming at me to maintain control of my own daughter's celebration. I told myself I was being collaborative, mature, willing to accept help. But what I was really doing was prioritizing the comfort of adults who had never once prioritized my children's needs. And I was doing it because years of interactions with Michael's family had trained me to believe that making waves was worse than swallowing my concerns. The catering bill arrived 2 weeks before the party, and the number at the bottom made me physically recoil when I opened the invoice on my phone. $2,500 for food for approximately 30 people, most of them children under the age of 12. The amount was absurd, completely disconnected from the modest celebration I had envisioned. But by the time I saw that number, Brittany had already booked the caterer, confirmed the menu, and framed the entire arrangement as a done deal that couldn't be altered without causing dramatic inconvenience. When I called her to discuss the cost, Her response was immediate and defensive. She explained with barely concealed irritation that quality ingredients cost money, that her reputation as a party planner depended on providing exceptional experiences, and that if I had wanted something cheaper, I should have been more explicit about my budget limitations from the beginning. The implication was clear. This was somehow my fault for not properly communicating, even though I had never asked her to spend such an extravagant amount. Michael, when I showed him the invoice, looked pained but unsurprised. He suggested we just pay it and move forward, that fighting about it would only create family tension that would make the actual party uncomfortable. I heard what he wasn't saying. Challenging Brittany would mean challenging his parents, who would inevitably take her side, and that would mean conflict that Michael had spent his entire life learning to avoid at any cost. So I paid the invoice. Each digit I typed into the payment portal, feeling like another small surrender of my own agency and judgment. I told myself it was for Lily, that her happiness was worth the financial strain and the bitter taste of being manipulated. But really, I was just doing what I'd been doing since I married into this family, making myself smaller, quieter, and more accommodating to avoid the exhausting drama that comes with asserting boundaries against people who have never respected them. The morning of the party arrived with that particular quality of light that seems designed for celebrations, bright and clear without being harsh. Lily woke up before her alarm, bursting into our bedroom with the kind of explosive energy that 8-year-olds generate on special occasions. Her face was luminous with anticipation, and watching her bounce around the room describing everything she was excited about made every compromise, an uncomfortable conversation feel momentarily worthwhile. Paige, Lily's 11-year-old sister, was already awake and had secretly decorated the hallway outside Lily's bedroom with streamers and a handmade banner. The relationship between my daughters has always been extraordinary, but it deepened profoundly after Lily's allergy diagnosis 3 years ago. Paige transformed from typical older sister into fierce protector, self-appointed guardian, and constant advocate. She learned to read ingredient labels before most kids her age could identify simple allergens. She positioned herself between Lily and potential threats with the intensity of a Secret Service agent protecting a president. The party was scheduled to begin at 2 in the afternoon, and guests started arriving right on time. Children poured into our rented community space with that chaotic energy that comes from sugar anticipation and the promise of games and celebration. Parents lingered near the entrance, making small talk and keeping one eye on their kids while juggling gift bags and jackets. Brittany had arrived an hour early to oversee the catering setup, and I had felt a small measure of relief watching her direct the staff with military precision. She seemed competent and in control, and I allowed myself to believe that perhaps my anxiety had been unfounded, that maybe she really had planned something thoughtful and appropriate for Lily's special day. The venue looked beautiful. I had to admit that much. Brittany had arranged the decorations with an aesthetic coherence that I would never have achieved on my own. Tables were positioned perfectly, balloons clustered in coordinated colors, and the overall atmosphere felt festive without being overwhelming. If I had stopped my assessment there, if I had only looked at the visual elements, I might have relaxed completely. But then the food arrived, and something in my body responded before my conscious mind fully processed what I was seeing. The caterers began arranging platters and dishes across several tables, and with each new item they unveiled, a cold sensation spread through my chest. Everything looked professionally prepared, visually appealing, exactly the kind of impressive spread that would photograph well for Brittany's business portfolio. But as I moved closer, examining the dishes more carefully, I felt my throat begin to close with an emotion somewhere between rage and terror. Lily has a severe tree nut allergy, the kind that doesn't allow for casual exposure or small mistakes. We discovered this allergy 3 years ago in the most traumatic way possible. when she took a single bite of a cookie at a friend's house and went into anaphylactic shock within minutes. I have never experienced fear like I did during the drive to the emergency room that day, watching my daughter struggle to breathe while her lips swelled and her skin erupted in angry red welts. The allergist who treated her afterward explained with careful seriousness that Lily's reaction classified as severe, that future exposures could be fatal if not treated immediately, and that we needed to treat her allergy with extreme caution. We restructured our entire household around her safety, eliminating all tree nuts from our kitchen, learning to read labels with forensic attention to detail, and having lengthy conversations with every teacher, coach, and parent who might ever supervise her. Michael's family knew about Lily's allergy because we had told them repeatedly in multiple conversations, with varying levels of detail depending on the context. We had explained the severity during family dinners. We had reminded them before holiday gatherings. We had sent information about cross-contamination and label reading. This was not secret information or recently discovered medical history. This was established, documented, frequently discussed family knowledge. And yet, as I examined the catering spread Brittany had selected for Lily's birthday party, nearly every single item contained tree nuts in some form. Almond-crusted chicken strips, pistachio-studded desserts, hazelnut chocolate cakes, cashew-topped salads. Even the fruit arrangements had nut-based granola sprinkled across them. It wasn't that Brittany had failed to include a few safe options alongside potentially unsafe items. She had created an entirely nut-centered menu for a child with a life-threatening nut allergy. I stood there for several long seconds, trying to make sense of what I was looking at, cycling through possible explanations that might make this less catastrophic than it appeared. Perhaps she had ordered separate safe dishes that simply hadn't been delivered yet. Perhaps there was a labeling mix-up, and these weren't the actual items meant for our party. Perhaps I was misreading ingredients or overreacting to minor concerns. But no alternative explanation survived scrutiny. This was deliberate. Whether born from active malice or such profound neglect that it amounted to the same thing. Brittany had spent weeks planning this party, had charged me an enormous sum for catering, had presented herself as the competent professional managing every detail, and had produced a menu that could kill my daughter if she ingested even a small amount of the food surrounding her at her own birthday celebration. The children, oblivious to the danger, began gravitating toward the food tables with that magnetic pull that draws kids toward anything sweet and colorful. Several of Lily's friends were already reaching for plates, pointing at different items, discussing what they wanted to try first. And Lily, my beautiful, trusting 8-year-old daughter, was walking toward the dessert table with her hand already extended toward a particularly elaborate cake, decorated with what I now recognized as chopped almonds. I moved without thinking, my body responding to threat before my mind finished processing. I reached Lily just as her fingers were inches from the cake, and I caught her hand gently but firmly. She looked up at me with surprise and slight confusion, not understanding why I had stopped her from serving herself at her own birthday party. Before I could explain, before I could pull her aside and figure out how to handle this catastrophic situation without traumatizing her on her special day, Lily turned toward the adult manning the dessert table and asked the question I had taught her to always ask when food origins were uncertain. "Does this have nuts in it?" Her voice was clear and careful, the question automatic after years of training. She wasn't being difficult or demanding, just following the safety protocol that had become second nature. She expected an honest answer, expected the adults around her to help keep her safe, expected that at her own birthday party, the food would be selected with her well-being in mind. The adult managing the dessert table was Brittany, and when Lily asked her direct question, my sister-in-law didn't even turn around to acknowledge her. Brittany was rearranging plates and adjusting the positioning of various desserts, treating the food display like an art installation that required perfect geometric precision. She appeared not to have heard Lily's question, though the room wasn't particularly loud and Lily had spoken clearly. Lily tried again, her voice slightly louder and tinged with the beginning of uncertainty. "Aunt Brittany, can I have this one?" She was pointing at a cupcake topped with what looked like chocolate frosting but was actually, as I could see from my position, chocolate hazelnut spread garnished with crushed hazelnuts. This time, Brittany definitely heard her because she responded immediately, though she still didn't turn around or make eye contact. Her voice carried clearly across that section of the room, audible to the several children clustered nearby and at least a few adults within hearing range. "You can't eat any of the food here," Brittany said with the casual dismissiveness of someone shooing away a persistent insect. "Ask your mom for a plate." The words landed like physical blows, each one striking with precision. Lily froze completely, her hand still extended toward the cupcake, her expression shifting from confusion to hurt, to something worse: shame. The other children nearby, several of whom already had plates loaded with treats, turned to stare at her. One boy already had chocolate smeared across his chin from whatever he'd been enthusiastically consuming. Lily looked at their full plates, then at her own empty hands, then across the room to where I stood, watching this scene unfold with mounting horror. Her voice when she spoke was small and careful, trying so hard not to cause problems or make anyone uncomfortable. "Mom, did you bring my special plate?" Not angry, not demanding, not throwing a tantrum, just confused and embarrassed, trying to understand why she was being excluded from the food at her own birthday celebration, trying to figure out what she had done wrong to deserve this treatment. I crossed the space between us in seconds, barely aware of moving, operating on pure protective instinct. I reached Lily and knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder, before turning my attention to Brittany with a question I already knew the answer to. "What plate? Why would you tell her that?" Brittany finally turned around, and the expression on her face was not apologetic or concerned. She looked annoyed, inconvenienced by being questioned, put out that I was making an issue of her perfectly reasonable instructions. She sighed with theatrical exasperation, the kind of performative patience that carries an underlying message of superiority and judgment. "Jessica," she said, using my name like a reprimand, "Lily has a nut allergy. I assumed you would bring her a safe meal. You're her mother. That's your responsibility." The audacity of that statement, the breathtaking gall of blaming me for her decision to serve dangerous food to my allergic child, rendered me momentarily speechless. I stood there processing what she had just said, trying to align it with any version of reality that made sense. "You assumed?" I finally managed, my voice lower and more controlled than I felt. "You planned this entire party, selected every item on the menu, charged me $2,500 for catering, and you're saying you assumed I would bring separate food for my own daughter at her own birthday celebration?" Brittany's expression shifted to defensive righteousness. That particular facial arrangement people adopt when they've been caught doing something indefensible, but have decided to brazen through it anyway. She folded her arms across her chest, physically closing herself off from criticism or accountability. "Well, yes, obviously," she said with forced patience. "It's not fair to all the other children to miss out on good food just because one person has dietary restrictions. So of course I ordered things everyone else would enjoy. You should have brought Lily her own plate. That's what responsible parents do." Behind me, I could hear the sounds of children eating, the chatter and laughter of kids enjoying treats. Lily was beside me, silent and still, watching the other children with an expression that contained far too much resignation for an 8-year-old at her own birthday party. Paige had materialized at Lily's other side, her arm wrapped protectively around her little sister, her face set in that fierce expression she wears whenever she perceives someone threatening Lily. "Show me the menu," I said, extending my hand. It wasn't a request. Brittany rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation, as if I was being unreasonable and melodramatic, but she reached behind the table and produced the catering sheet. I scanned it methodically, reading every item description, checking every ingredient list. With each line, I read, The situation became clearer and more damning. Every single dessert contained tree nuts: almonds, pistachios, hazelnuts, cashews in various forms and combinations. The main dishes were only marginally better, many incorporating nut-based sauces or crusts. Even the supposedly safe fruit arrangements had been topped with nut-containing granola. There were no safe options, not because safe options didn't exist or were too expensive or required special ordering, but because Brittany simply hadn't bothered to include any. This wasn't an oversight or an honest mistake. This was negligence so profound it constituted active endangerment. Brittany had spent weeks planning this party with full knowledge of Lily's life-threatening allergy, and she had created a menu that made Lily's presence at her own celebration dangerous. I looked at my daughter, watched her eyes moving from treat to treat, observing the other children enjoying food that could kill her, trying so hard to pretend she wasn't disappointed or hurt or confused about why her birthday was suddenly about everyone except her. The expression on her face was quiet devastation, the kind of pain that doesn't announce itself with tears or tantrums, but settles into a child's understanding of how little their safety matters to the adults who should protect them. Behind me, Brittany kept talking, her voice taking on that tone of condescending explanation that people use when they believe themselves to be obviously correct and everyone else to be embarrassingly wrong. "Jessica, you're making this into something it isn't. Lily doesn't have to eat right now. She can eat later at home. She doesn't need to make this whole party about her dietary problems. You're teaching her to be entitled and attention-seeking. The world doesn't revolve around one child's restrictions." Then Sherry, Michael's mother and Brittany's eternally loyal defender, joined the conversation with her own contribution to this catastrophic situation. "It's not dangerous if she doesn't eat the food, Jessica. You're being dramatic. Brittany worked very hard on this party." And Richard, Michael's father, added his voice to the chorus of people who apparently believed that my daughter's life-threatening allergy was primarily an inconvenience to be minimized rather than a serious medical condition requiring accommodation. "You're ruining the party," he said with genuine reproach. "Brittany spent weeks planning every detail. The least you could do is show some appreciation instead of creating problems." I stood there listening to these people, these adults who claimed to love my daughter, these family members who had been informed repeatedly about the severity of her allergy, and I realized with sudden crystalline clarity that nothing I said would penetrate their willful ignorance and determined self-righteousness. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to acknowledge the danger. They weren't going to admit that endangering a child at her own birthday party might constitute a problem worth addressing. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Not an explosion of rage or a dramatic emotional transformation, but rather a cold, clear settling into certainty. I was done explaining, done negotiating, done trying to make these people understand why my daughter's life mattered. I was done prioritizing their comfort over her safety. I was done making myself small to avoid conflict with people who had never once extended me the same consideration. I stepped onto a nearby chair, the kind of white folding chair that every rental facility seems to stock in unlimited quantities. The action was deliberate and visible, immediately drawing attention from around the room. Conversations faltered and stopped as people turned to see what was happening. "Everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the space. Not shouting, not emotional, just loud enough to command attention. "I need to tell you all something." The room went completely silent. Children stopped eating mid-bite. Adults paused their conversations and turned toward me. Even the caterers, positioned near the kitchen area, stopped moving and watched. The sudden absence of sound was profound and complete. "The food Brittany ordered for this party is not safe for Lily," I continued, speaking clearly and calmly. "Everything on these tables contains tree nuts, which means everything here could kill my daughter if she ingests even a small amount." The silence somehow deepened, became heavier. I saw several parents glance down at their children's plates with expressions of dawning understanding and concern. One mother actually pulled a cookie out of her son's hand mid-bite. "So we're removing all of it," I said, "right now." A few children gasped audibly. One little boy set his plate down on the nearest table like it had suddenly become radioactive. Lily was staring up at me with wide eyes, not quite believing what she was hearing, not quite trusting that this was really happening. "I'll be ordering replacement food immediately," I continued. "It'll take some time to arrive, so while we wait, all the children can go outside to play. The outdoor area is set up with games and activities." One parent nearby whispered to another, barely audible but loud enough for me to catch. "She's removing all of it? Everything?" "Yes," I confirmed, looking directly at the woman who had spoken. "All of it." I turned my attention back to Brittany, who was staring at me with an expression of absolute shock mixed with growing fury. She looked like someone had just announced that gravity was being suspended, and she couldn't quite process the impossibility of what she was hearing. "If anyone disagrees with this decision," I added calmly, my eyes never leaving Brittany's face, "you are welcome to take your plate and step outside to finish eating, but this food will not remain in this room with my daughter, not for one more minute. No shouting, no crying, no theatrical displays of emotion. Just a simple, non-negotiable statement of fact delivered with the kind of certainty that comes from finally, definitively choosing your child's safety over everyone else's comfort." Michael appeared at my side then, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw something new in his face. Not the usual careful neutrality he maintained around his family, not the practiced peacekeeping expression he wore during conflicts, but something harder and clearer. He stood beside me, slightly in front of me actually, positioning his body between me and his family with deliberate protectiveness. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. His presence alone spoke volumes, communicated a shift that everyone in the room immediately recognized. Michael had chosen a side, and he had chosen ours. For approximately 5 full seconds, nobody breathed. The silence wasn't empty or peaceful. It was full of shock and calculation, and dawning realization that something fundamental had just changed in the room's power dynamics. Sherry's mouth was hanging open, literally agape, as if her jaw muscles had temporarily stopped functioning. Richard stood frozen with his arms at his sides, looking like someone had unplugged him from whatever internal power source usually animated his movements and opinions. And Brittany stood behind the dessert table, gripping its edge so hard her knuckles were white, staring at me like she was seeing a complete stranger wearing my face. But Lily's expression was entirely different. She was looking at me like the world had just tilted back into its proper alignment, like gravity had been restored after hours of floating untethered in space. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something that looked like relief mixed with love, mixed with a kind of pride that made my throat tighten. That silence, that profound and heavy quiet, communicated everything that needed to be said. Everyone in that room understood exactly what had just happened. They knew that Brittany had endangered a child. They knew that I had drawn a line. And they knew that nothing was going back to the way it was before. Then Brittany's voice shattered the silence, high-pitched and shaking with barely controlled fury. "You're ruining everything," she shouted, her voice cracking on the last word. "This is insane, Jessica. Everything was fine. You're making a scene over nothing." To understand how we arrived at that catastrophic birthday party, I need to explain the family dynamics that had been building toward this confrontation for years. Michael's family operates according to an unspoken but rigidly enforced hierarchy, and Brittany has occupied the position of favored child, protected princess, and family priority for as long as anyone can remember. I didn't grow up with these people, didn't witness the early years of Brittany's reign as the center of the family universe, so I only learned about it gradually after marrying Michael. The information came in pieces, revealed through uncomfortable family dinners and casual comments that carried tremendous weight. Through old photographs where the body language told stories, the smiling faces tried to hide. Brittany, according to family legend, retold with disturbing frequency and pride, had been exceptional from birth. She walked early, talked early, read early, charmed teachers effortlessly, won awards without trying, and apparently developed the ability to manipulate family dynamics professionally by adolescence. Every story Sherry and Richard told about their children's childhood positioned Brittany as the protagonist, the achiever, the child who made them proud and validated their parenting. Michael existed somewhere in the margins of these family narratives, mentioned occasionally as Brittany's older brother, but rarely as an individual with his own achievements or identity. He appeared in family photographs with the body language of someone who had accepted second place so long ago that he no longer remembered what first place might feel like. When I first started dating Michael, he tried to warn me about his family dynamic, though his warning was so understated and carefully worded that I didn't fully appreciate what he was telling me until much later. "My sister is intense," he said once after Brittany had completely hijacked our anniversary dinner to workshop chapter titles for a book she was allegedly writing about elevated event styling. She had literally moved from her table to ours, pulled up a chair, and begun soliciting our opinions on various pretentious titles, without apparently noticing or caring that we were celebrating our anniversary. "Intense how?" I had asked, still young and naive enough to believe that intense meant enthusiastic or passionate, like someone really committed to their hobbies. "Intense like a natural disaster?" Michael said, his voice carrying an edge of resignation that I wouldn't fully understand for years. "Like a hurricane. You see it coming, you prepare as much as you can, but ultimately you just have to survive it and rebuild after it passes." "That seems dramatic," I said. "Does it?" he asked, glancing toward Brittany, who was now showing other diners in the restaurant examples of party decorations on her phone, despite the fact that they were complete strangers trying to eat their meals in peace. He was right, of course. Brittany operated like a force of nature, sweeping through situations and relationships and family events with absolute conviction that her vision, her needs, and her desires took automatic precedence over everyone else's. And the truly remarkable thing was that his family had not only enabled this behavior, but actively celebrated it. By the time Michael and I had Paige and Lily, who are now 11 and 8, I had collected substantial evidence supporting Michael's hurricane metaphor. Brittany wasn't just the favorite child. She was the family's central organizing principle, the sun around which everyone else orbited, the voice that mattered more than any other family member's preferences or needs. Family gatherings followed predictable patterns that reinforced this hierarchy at every opportunity. Brittany's children, Haley and Carter, were consistently given first choice of everything: gifts, treats, games, activities, attention. Meanwhile, my daughters were gently but firmly taught to wait their turn, defer to their cousins, and accept whatever remained after Brittany's children had selected what they wanted. The language Sherry and Richard used to enforce this hierarchy was superficially polite but fundamentally dismissive. "Let them go first, they're younger," they would say about Haley and Carter, even when technically my daughters were the same age or actually younger. "Don't be selfish. Let them choose first," they would tell Paige and Lily, while never applying the same standard to Brittany's children. I remember one particularly painful incident when Paige, who must have been about 7 at the time, spent hours working on an elaborate drawing to show her grandfather, Richard. She was so proud of this drawing, had put so much care and detail into it, and was genuinely excited to share it with him. She waited patiently for a moment when he wasn't occupied, then approached him shyly with her artwork held carefully in both hands. Richard glanced at Paige's drawing for perhaps half a second, said, That's nice. Sweetie, in the tone of voice people use when they're not actually paying attention, and immediately turned away to watch Haley demonstrate what she called her special dance, which consisted of her waving her arms around with all the coordination and artistic merit of someone having a medical emergency. Richard applauded Haley's performance like she had just cured a major disease, asked her to do it again so Sherry could record it, and then spent 10 minutes discussing Haley's obvious natural talent for performance arts. Paige stood there, still holding her drawing, watching this unfold with an expression that has haunted me for years. Not crying, not complaining, just absorbing another lesson about her place in this family's hierarchy. Michael witnessed these moments too, and each one caused visible tension in his body. His shoulders would tighten, his jaw would set, and something wounded would flash across his face before he carefully suppressed it. But he never said anything, never confronted his parents, never advocated for our daughters in those moments. He would just sit there, rigid and silent, looking like someone watching an old injury reopen. Later, when we were alone in the car driving home, he would offer quiet justifications that sounded more like apologies. "They don't mean anything by it," he would say. "That's just how they are. It's not worth causing problems. The girls are fine." But the girls weren't fine. Not really. They were learning the same lessons Michael had learned throughout his childhood, that their feelings mattered less than avoiding conflict, that their needs came second to Brittany's children's wants. That love in this family was conditional and unevenly distributed. The financial dynamics of Michael's relationship with his family added another disturbing layer to this already dysfunctional pattern. When Michael turned 18 and prepared to attend college, Sherry and Richard sat him down for what he described as a serious conversation about family finances. "We're sorry," Sherry had told him with what Michael described as genuine seeming regret. "But we simply can't afford to help you with college. Money is really tight right now. You'll need to figure it out yourself. Maybe get scholarships or take out loans." Michael, being Michael, didn't argue or push back or question this pronouncement. He accepted it as unfortunate but unchangeable reality, applied for every scholarship he could find, worked part-time jobs throughout college, and took out student loans that he spent years paying off after graduation. He made it work because that's what Michael does. He makes things work regardless of how unfair or difficult the circumstances. But 4 years later, when Brittany graduated high school and prepared to attend college, suddenly money was no longer tight. Suddenly, Sherry and Richard discovered an abundance of resources they could devote to their daughter's education. Not only could they cover her tuition entirely, but they wanted to. Insisted on it, actually, because they believed Brittany had so much potential, and they wanted her to focus fully on her studies without the distraction of work or financial stress. When Michael learned about this, he didn't explode with righteous anger or demand explanations, or point out the obvious injustice of this situation. He just sat there, absorbing this information, processing the clear message his parents were sending about who mattered in their family and who didn't, and then, somehow making an already terrible situation worse, Sherry and Richard asked Michael if he might consider contributing to Brittany's education as well. "It would mean so much to the family," Sherry said, "if you could help your sister pursue her dreams." The audacity of asking the child you refuse to help financially to then subsidize the child you chose to support fully is almost breathtaking in its cruelty. But Michael said yes. Of course he said yes, because his family had spent his entire life training him to feel responsible for Brittany's happiness, teaching him that his role was to facilitate her success, conditioning him to believe that saying no to family requests made him selfish and cruel. So Michael sent money to help pay for Brittany's college expenses, while still paying off his own student loans. And he kept sending money after she graduated, whenever his parents called with some new family emergency or unexpected expense. The amounts varied, but they were regular and substantial enough to impact our household budget, and they continued throughout our marriage. I didn't complain about this for a long time. I understood that family relationships are complicated, that Michael felt obligated to help, that pushing back might create conflicts that would strain his relationship with his parents. But privately, it bothered me profoundly, not because we couldn't afford to help occasionally, but because of the one-sided nature of the arrangement and the complete absence of gratitude or acknowledgement from the people benefiting from Michael's generosity. Sherry and Richard never thanked him. Not really. They accepted his financial contributions like they were simply his responsibility, his fair share of family obligations that they could request whenever they deemed necessary. And Brittany, despite directly benefiting from her brother's sacrifices, seemed to view his support as her rightful due, rather than as generosity worth acknowledging. The requests continued even after Brittany had children of her own. Suddenly, there were birthday gifts to fund, sports fees to cover, random emergencies that required immediate financial assistance. And Michael, trapped in patterns established decades earlier, kept saying yes, kept sending money, kept prioritizing his family's requests over our own household needs or his daughter's desires. When I did finally raise concerns about this dynamic, Michael's response was defensive and uncomfortable. "They're family," he would say. "Family helps each other. That's what you do." But what he really meant was that he helped them, continuously and substantively, while receiving nothing comparable in return beyond occasional permission to exist at family gatherings where his children were treated as afterthoughts and his wife was viewed as insufficiently grateful for the privilege of association. Then Lily developed her nut allergy, and everything I thought I understood about this family's capacity for cruelty and negligence revealed itself as incomplete. Because what happened after Lily's diagnosis demonstrated not just favoritism or financial exploitation, but something darker, fundamental disregard for a child's life. The incident that led to Lily's diagnosis remains the most terrifying experience of my life. She was 5 years old, attending a play date at a friend's house while I ran errands nearby. The friend's mother was lovely, had seemed responsible and attentive, had assured me that she would watch the girls carefully while they played, and had snacks. Lily ate one bite of a cookie, just one small bite of something that looked harmless and delicious, something the friend's mother had made herself without any awareness that tree nuts could be so dangerous for some children. Within minutes, Lily's lips began swelling. Her face erupted in angry red welts. She started gasping for breath, that horrible sound that doesn't actually move enough air, the sound of someone drowning in open space. The friend's mother called me immediately, her voice high with panic. I was 3 blocks away, close enough to get there in seconds, but far enough that those seconds stretched into eternities. I remember running into the house and seeing Lily's face, swollen and red and terrified, her small body struggling desperately for air that wouldn't come. I have never driven faster in my life than I drove to the emergency room that day. Michael met us there, having left work the moment I called him, his face as white as I'd ever seen it. Paige was with us too, sitting in the back seat next to Lily, holding her sister's hand and crying quietly while trying to stay calm because she thought Lily needed her to be brave. The sound Lily made in that car, the awful struggling gasps, the way her chest moved frantically trying to pull in air, still wakes me up some nights. I'll be sleeping peacefully and then suddenly I'm back in that moment, hearing that sound, reliving that drive, feeling that particular combination of terror and helplessness that comes from watching your child suffer and being unable to immediately fix it. Lily survived because we got her to the hospital in time and because the emergency room staff responded quickly and effectively. They administered epinephrine, gave her oxygen, monitored her carefully while the allergic reaction slowly subsided. But it was a near thing. Close enough that the attending physician made a point of explaining to us how serious the situation had been, how quickly things could have gone wrong, how vigilant we would need to be going forward. The allergist we consulted afterward ran comprehensive tests and delivered a diagnosis that transformed our entire approach to food, dining, and social situations. Lily had a severe allergy to all tree nuts, the kind of allergy where even small exposures could trigger life-threatening anaphylaxis. We would need to carry EpiPens at all times, eliminate nuts entirely from our home, read every food label with forensic attention, and communicate clearly with everyone who might ever supervise or feed our daughter. Everything changed after that diagnosis. Our kitchen was completely reorganized. Every item containing or potentially containing tree nuts was removed, and we established protocols for shopping, cooking, and dining that prioritized Lily's safety above everything else. Paige, who was 8 at the time, transformed from typical older sister into fierce guardian, learning to read labels, question ingredients, and position herself between Lily and potential threats with intensity that was touching and heartbreaking in equal measure. And we told Michael's family, not once, but repeatedly. We explained the severity of Lily's allergy in clear, explicit terms. We described what had happened, how close we had come to losing her, how serious we needed them to take this medical condition. We provided information about cross-contamination, label reading, safe food handling, and the importance of checking ingredients before serving anything to Lily. Sherry's response to this information was to minimize its importance. "Oh, lots of children have allergies nowadays," she said dismissively. "You're probably being too cautious. Kids are tougher than parents think." Richard treated the allergy like a minor inconvenience, something that required slight accommodation but wasn't actually serious enough to warrant significant changes to family gatherings or food selections. And Brittany, predictably, framed Lily's allergy primarily in terms of how it affected her. "Does this mean we can't have nuts at family dinners anymore?" she asked, sounding genuinely put out. "That seems a bit extreme. Carter loves almond cookies." We continued explaining, continued educating, continued requesting that family gatherings include some safe options for Lily so she wouldn't have to sit and watch everyone else eat while she had nothing. Sometimes they remembered and made minimal accommodations. Often they forgot or didn't bother, and we would arrive at family events to discover that once again, nothing was safe for Lily to eat. Michael would grow quiet and tense during these gatherings, watching Lily sit with an empty plate while her cousins enjoyed elaborate meals. But he wouldn't confront his parents, wouldn't ask why they repeatedly failed to accommodate his daughter's medical needs, wouldn't acknowledge that this pattern represented something more disturbing than simple forgetfulness. So he always brought separate food for Lily when attending family events, carrying carefully prepared safe meals that she could eat, while everyone else enjoyed whatever had been served. It became routine, expected, just another accommodation we made to avoid conflict with people who had made clear that our daughter's safety ranked lower than their convenience. And then came Lily's 8th birthday, and Brittany announced that she wanted to plan it. She framed her offer as generous, helpful, even sacrificial. She was starting a party planning business, she explained, and wanted to create something really special for her niece's birthday. She would handle everything, all the details, all the arrangements, all the catering. We wouldn't have to worry about anything. She just needed a budget, and she would create a celebration that Lily would never forget. The sincerity in Brittany's voice almost convinced me. She seemed genuinely enthusiastic, apparently eager to do something nice for Lily, possibly even hoping to demonstrate her event planning skills while creating good family memories. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe she was making an effort, extending an olive branch, trying to show that she cared about our family, despite years of evidence suggesting otherwise. Michael was less convinced, but also less resistant than I expected. "If she wants to help, maybe we should let her," he said when I expressed reservations. "It might be good for her relationship with Lily, and it would take some stress off you." What he really meant was that refusing Brittany's offer would create conflict, hurt feelings, family drama that he desperately wanted to avoid. The path of least resistance was accepting her involvement. And Michael had spent his entire life walking that path. So I agreed, suppressing the anxiety tightening in my chest, telling myself I was being collaborative and mature, rather than ignoring obvious warning signs. Brittany immediately seized control of the entire planning process, making decisions about themes, decorations, activities, and food with minimal input from us and maximum certainty about her own superior judgment. When I tried to discuss Lily's allergy and the need for safe food options, Brittany's response was reassuring but vague. Of course, she said, waving away my concerns like they were minor details that didn't require serious discussion. I've got it handled, don't worry. But I did worry constantly, because Brittany had never demonstrated genuine understanding of or concern about Lily's allergy before. Why would she suddenly become vigilant about ingredient checking and cross-contamination when she'd spent years treating the allergy as an inconvenient overreaction? The catering invoice arrived 2 weeks before the party, and the amount shocked me so profoundly I actually gasped when I saw it. $2,500 for food for approximately 30 people, most of them children under 12. The number was absurd, wildly disconnected from any reasonable estimate for a child's birthday party. When I called Brittany to question the cost, her response was immediate and defensive. "Quality costs money," she explained, with barely concealed irritation. Her business reputation depended on providing exceptional experiences. If I had wanted something cheaper, I should have been more explicit about budget constraints from the beginning. The subtext was clear. This was my fault for not properly managing expectations, for not understanding that quality service required substantial investment, for potentially embarrassing her fledgling business by complaining about prices after she had already committed to vendors. Michael, when I showed him the invoice, looked pained but unsurprised. "Let's just pay it," he said quietly. "Fighting about it now will only make things worse." Translation: challenging Brittany would mean challenging his parents, who would inevitably take her side, which would create family conflict that Michael desperately wanted to avoid, especially right before what was supposed to be a happy celebration for Lily. So I paid the invoice, each digit I entered into the payment portal, feeling like another small surrender. Another compromise that prioritized everyone else's comfort over my own judgment and my family's interests. And that decision, that choice to pay for something I knew was wrong because fighting seemed harder than complying, led directly to the moment when I stood at my daughter's birthday party watching Brittany tell Lily she couldn't eat any of the food at her own celebration. That moment when everything finally, definitively broke. After I made my announcement about removing all the food, the room remained suspended in that heavy, shocked silence for several more seconds. Then Brittany's voice shattered the quiet, rising to a pitch I'd never heard from her before. "You're destroying your own kid's party," she shouted, her voice cracking with fury and disbelief. "This is insane, Jessica. Everything was perfect. You're making a scene over nothing." Several children nearby flinched at the volume and intensity of her outburst. Parents moved instinctively closer to their kids, that protective response that activates automatically when adults start behaving unpredictably in spaces full of children. Brittany kept talking, words pouring out in frantic bursts like she was trying to grab control back through sheer volume and conviction. "You're being completely irrational. You can't seriously expect everyone to go without food just because Lily has restrictions. She doesn't have to eat the food. Nobody's forcing her. We can order something separate for her. There's no reason to throw away perfectly good catering that I spent weeks planning." Before I could formulate a response, Sherry pushed forward through the small crowd that had gathered, pulling Richard along behind her like reinforcements being deployed to a battlefield. Her face was flushed, her expression a mixture of outrage and disbelief that anyone, especially me, would dare challenge her daughter's decisions. "Our daughter worked day and night on this party," Sherry announced, her voice loud enough to carry across the entire venue. "She picked every single detail personally. She planned everything with such care and attention. She did all of this for Lily, to give her a special day, and you're standing here treating her like she's some kind of criminal. This is how you show gratitude?" The word gratitude landed with particular emphasis, as if the primary issue at hand was my failure to properly appreciate Brittany's efforts rather than the fact that every item of food in the room could kill my daughter. Richard added his voice to the chorus, his tone carrying that particular quality of male disappointment that's designed to shame women into compliance. "This is completely unnecessary, Jessica. You're embarrassing Brittany in front of everyone. She put her professional reputation on the line for this party. The least you could do is handle this situation with some grace and discretion instead of making a public spectacle." I stood there listening to them defend their daughter's decision to serve dangerous food to an allergic child, listening to them frame my concern for Lily's safety as unreasonable drama, listening to them prioritize Brittany's feelings over their granddaughter's life, and I felt something cold and final settle into place inside me. But before I could respond, before I could begin articulating the many ways their response was appalling and unacceptable, Michael moved. He didn't just stand beside me or offer quiet support. He stood up so suddenly and decisively that multiple people actually gasped. Michael, who spent his entire life fading into backgrounds and avoiding confrontation, who had perfected the art of becoming invisible during family conflicts, who had trained himself to never rock the boat or challenge his family's dynamics, suddenly occupied more space than I'd ever seen him claim. He moved between me and his family, shoulders squared, jaw set, physically positioning himself as a barrier between their anger and accusations and us. And then he said 3 words that I don't think anyone in that room, possibly including Michael himself, ever expected to hear from him. "You need to leave." The words weren't loud or emotional. They were quiet, controlled, and absolutely final. They carried the weight of decades of suppressed frustration, years of accumulated hurt, and the profound transformation that happens when someone finally stops prioritizing other people's comfort over his own children's safety. The silence that followed felt like the moment after a bomb detonates. That strange quiet where everyone is still processing what just happened and trying to understand the full extent of the damage. "What?" Sherry whispered, her voice small and shocked, as if she couldn't possibly have heard correctly. Michael didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't backpedal. "All 3 of you need to leave. Now." You could feel the shock ripple outward through the room like a physical wave. This wasn't how Michael behaved. This wasn't how family conflicts were supposed to resolve. This violated every unspoken rule his family had established about hierarchy, about Brittany's protected status, about Michael's role as the accommodating son who absorbed mistreatment without complaint. Brittany laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that contained more panic than amusement. "Michael, don't do this. She's being completely dramatic. You know she's overreacting. Don't let her manipulate you into—" "You put Lily at risk," Michael interrupted, his voice cutting through her words with surgical precision. He wasn't yelling, wasn't becoming emotional, just stating facts with devastating clarity. "You endangered her, and now you're defending it instead of apologizing." Richard tried to intervene, stepping forward with his hands raised in that placating gesture men use when they're trying to calm down situations they don't actually understand. "Son, nobody endangered anyone. You're overreacting just like Jessica. Lily didn't eat anything dangerous. She's perfectly fine. There's no reason to—" "She could have died," Michael said, louder now, the words heavy with controlled fury. "Lily could have died because of what you served. And you're standing here acting like the real problem is that we're upset about it." That statement silenced Richard completely, His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, like someone had disconnected his ability to formulate justifications. Sherry's eyes went wide, filling with tears that might have been genuine distress or might have been performative hurt designed to manipulate Michael back into compliance. Michael, we didn't do anything wrong. We would never hurt Lily. You can't honestly believe? You're defending Brittany instead of acknowledging what happened, Michael interrupted, his voice firm and clear. You're making this about hurt feelings and business reputations instead of about the fact that my daughter wasn't safe at her own birthday party. He paused, letting that sink in, then gestured toward Lily, who was still pressed against Paige's side, watching this entire confrontation with wide, uncertain eyes. Look at her, Michael said quietly. Really look at her, and then tell me that your daughter's feelings matter more than her safety. Sherry, Richard, and Brittany all turned to look at Lily, perhaps for the first time truly seeing her in this moment. Lily stared back at them, small and confused, and trying to understand why her birthday had become this awful confrontation, why the adults in her life were fighting, why something that was supposed to be happy and celebratory had turned frightening and tense. None of them said anything. What could they say? How do you look at a frightened 8-year-old child at her own birthday party and explain that your adult daughter's convenience mattered more than her safety? Brittany swallowed hard, her face cycling through several emotions: anger, hurt, defiance, and finally something that might have been embarrassment or might have been calculation as she recognized that the social dynamics in the room were not in her favor. You're choosing her over your own family, Brittany finally said, her voice quieter but still carrying that underlying note of accusation, as if Michael was committing some profound betrayal by prioritizing his daughter. Michael didn't flinch or hesitate. I'm choosing my daughter, he said simply. Yes, absolutely, every time. He didn't add anything else, didn't qualify or soften the statement, didn't leave room for negotiation or compromise. That single sentence, I'm choosing my daughter, contained everything that needed to be said. It was a declaration, a line drawn, a fundamental reorganization of Michael's priorities that everyone in the room immediately understood was permanent and irreversible. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Brittany made a sharp, angry sound that wasn't quite a word, grabbed her children, Haley and Carter, by their hands and stalked toward the door with her head high and her expression furious. She moved with theatrical righteousness, like someone unjustly accused and martyred, making sure everyone watched her dramatic exit. Sherry and Richard followed more slowly, still glancing back toward Michael as if expecting him to break, to apologize, to backpedal and restore the familiar family dynamics where they held power and he accommodated their wishes. But Michael stood completely still, face set, watching them leave, without any indication that he was reconsidering his decision. As they reached the door, Richard turned back one more time. You're making a mistake, he said, trying one final time to assert authority and predict consequences. You're going to regret this. No, Michael said quietly but clearly. I'm not. The door closed behind them, cutting off whatever response Richard might have made. The sound of it shutting was final and definitive, like the end of a chapter or the last note of a song. The moment they were gone, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. The tension that had been coiling tighter and tighter suddenly released. Children started moving and talking again. Parents exchanged glances that communicated relief and support. Someone quietly began gathering plates of unsafe food to dispose of. I turned to Lily, kneeling down to her level, expecting to find her upset or crying or traumatized by witnessing such an intense confrontation. Instead, she threw her arms around my neck and whispered in my ear, "Thank you, Mommy. Thank you for keeping me safe." Those words, that simple expression of trust and gratitude from my 8-year-old daughter, made everything else, the conflict, the anger, the shattered family relationships, seem worth it. She understood on some level that what had just happened was fundamentally about her value, her safety, her right to matter as much as any other child. Paige joined the hug, wrapping her arms around both of us, creating a protective little circle of 3. I looked up over their heads and saw Michael watching us, his face containing emotions I couldn't fully read: relief, exhaustion, love, determination, maybe grief for the family relationships he'd just sacrificed. One of the parents, a kind woman named Teresa, whose daughter was in Lily's class, approached quietly. "I'm so sorry that happened," she said softly. "But you did exactly the right thing. We'll help with the cleanup and we'll keep the kids entertained outside while you order new food." Other parents nodded agreement, several coming forward to offer assistance without being asked. There was a solidarity in that moment, a shared understanding among the adults who prioritized children's safety over social comfort. I pulled out my phone and quickly ordered replacement catering from a restaurant we'd used before, one that understood food allergies and took them seriously. The owner assured me they could have safe food delivered within 45 minutes. Not ideal timing, but manageable. Michael organized the outdoor activities, herding the children toward the back area, where games and entertainment were set up. The kids went willingly, happy to escape the tension and return to playing. Their resilience, their ability to move past adult drama and return to simple enjoyment was both comforting and heartbreaking. Inside, several parents helped dispose of all the unsafe food, working efficiently without making a big production of it. The caterers, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, were apologetic, even though none of this was their fault. They'd simply prepared what Brittany ordered. As I watched the room being cleared of food that could harm my daughter, as I observed parents who were essentially strangers working together to prioritize a child's safety, I felt gratitude mixed with sadness. This was how community was supposed to function. This was how families were supposed to respond when a child's well-being was threatened. The new food arrived within 45 minutes as promised, and it was entirely safe. The restaurant had included a detailed ingredient list for every item, had prepared everything in a nut-free kitchen, and had even included a note wishing Lily a happy birthday. When the children came back inside and saw the new food spread, there was a moment of hesitation before they realized they could eat again. Then they descended on the tables with that particular enthusiasm children bring to birthday party food, and within minutes, the room was full of happy chatter and the sounds of kids enjoying themselves. Lily sat at the center of it all, surrounded by friends, eating cake that was safe for her, smiling in a way that made the entire terrible afternoon worth experiencing. This was what her birthday should have been from the beginning, a celebration where she was included, valued, and safe. As I watched her laugh with her friends, I felt Michael's hand find mine, his fingers intertwining with my own. I looked up at him and saw exhaustion mixed with peace in his expression, like someone who had just finished running a marathon they didn't know they were capable of completing. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. He considered the question seriously before answering. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I did the right thing." And he had. For the first time in his entire relationship with his family, Michael had chosen his daughters over his parents' expectations and his sister's demands. He had set a boundary that mattered, enforced a standard of behavior that prioritized child safety over adult comfort, and demonstrated to his daughters that their well-being was more important than maintaining dysfunctional family peace. The rest of the party proceeded beautifully. Games were played, cake was eaten, presents were opened, and Lily glowed with happiness throughout. If the earlier confrontation had affected her mood, she recovered quickly, absorbed in the joy of celebration and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. When the party finally ended and the last guests departed, Paige and Lily collapsed onto the couch in that particular post-party exhaustion that comes from hours of excitement and sugar consumption. They leaned against each other, happily tired, recounting favorite moments and already asking when they could see their friends again. Michael and I stood in the kitchen area looking at the remains of the celebration. Balloons, streamers, empty plates, the detritus of a successful party. "That was the most stressful birthday party I've ever experienced," I said. "Same," Michael agreed. "But Lily's happy." "She is," I confirmed, because she was safe and included and celebrated properly. Michael nodded, then pulled out his phone with sudden purposefulness. "I need to do something," he said. I watched as he opened his banking apps, his fingers moving with decisive certainty. He canceled the monthly transfer to his parents. He shut down the emergency credit line he'd opened for family use years ago. He deleted scheduled payments, standing orders, every financial connection that linked him to his family's ongoing demands. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. Decades of financial obligation, years of supporting people who never appreciated or reciprocated, erased in a series of deliberate clicks. "Are you sure?" I asked, not because I disagreed, but because I wanted him to be certain before taking such a final step. "Completely," Michael said without hesitation. "I'm done funding people who endangered my daughter and then blamed us for being upset about it." Then he opened the family group text chat, typed a single message, and hit send before I could even read what he'd written. I looked at his phone screen. "Paige and Lily will not be attending any future family events. We're protecting our daughters. Please don't contact us again." That was it. No lengthy explanation, no invitation for debate, no apology or softening language. Just a clear statement of boundary and consequence, delivered with finality. "Michael," I said, still processing what he'd just done. "What?" he asked, looking at me with unexpected calm. "Cancel the catering payment too," I said. A small smile appeared on his face, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in hours. Good idea. I pulled up the invoice from Brittany's event planning business, that $20,500 charge that had been bothering me since the moment I first saw it. I selected the option to dispute the charge and typed a brief explanation. "Unsafe food provided. Child with known allergy endangered. Service unusable." Submitted. Done. 14 seconds to revoke payment for a service that had actively endangered our daughter. Michael's phone started lighting up almost immediately. Text messages from Brittany, then Sherry, then Richard, then all three of them in increasingly frantic succession. "What did you do?" "The payment was canceled. You can't do this. That was my money. I already spent it. You're robbing me. Answer me right now." Michael turned his phone face down on the counter without reading all the messages. "Let them be mad," he said. "They're going to get louder," I warned. "Let them," he repeated. He was right on both counts. They got louder, and we let them. The house felt different that evening after we returned home from the party, and not just because of the lingering adrenaline from the confrontation. There was a quality of quiet that felt earned rather than imposed, a sense of space that came from finally removing something toxic rather than just learning to live around it. Paige and Lily went to their rooms quickly, exhausted by the long day and the emotional weight of everything they'd witnessed. Lily was smiling, though, genuinely happy in a way that made the entire terrible afternoon feel worthwhile. She'd gotten to celebrate her birthday with friends who cared about her, eating food that was safe, feeling valued and protected. Michael and I stood in the hallway like we'd both forgotten how to move forward into the rest of our evening. The day had been so intense, so emotionally overwhelming that returning to normal household routines felt impossible. I finally broke the silence. "That was absolutely insane." Michael didn't respond with words immediately. Instead, he walked into his office, sat down at his desk, and opened his laptop with the focused intensity of someone who had decided something and was now executing a plan without allowing himself time to reconsider. "What are you doing?" I asked, following him and standing behind his chair. "Finishing what I started," he said, his voice carrying a certainty I rarely heard from him. I watched over his shoulder as he methodically dismantled every financial connection between himself and his family. He canceled the monthly transfer that had been automatically sending money to his parents for years. He closed the emergency credit line he'd opened at their request. He deleted scheduled payments that were set up to cover various family expenses. He removed his parents as authorized users on accounts they'd been accessing. Each action took only seconds, but collectively they represented decades of financial exploitation being undone. Years of Michael quietly supporting people who took his generosity for granted, who never thanked him, who treated his resources as their entitlement rather than his choice to share. Watching him do it was remarkable. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no pausing to reconsider or soften the decision. Just methodical, deliberate action driven by absolute certainty that this was right. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly, like someone who'd just completed a difficult physical task. "I'm done," he said quietly. Those two words carried the weight of liberation and finality, the sound of someone who had finally stopped carrying a burden they should never have been forced to hold. Before I could respond, he picked up his phone, which was still lighting up with increasingly frantic messages from his family, and typed one final communication in the family group chat. He showed me the screen before sending, "Paige and Lily will not be attending any future family events. We're protecting our daughters. Please don't contact us again." "Are you sure?" I asked one more time, wanting to give him the opportunity to reconsider before taking such a permanent step. "Completely," he said, and hit send. The message was brief, clear, and final. No apology, no justification beyond the simple fact of protecting his daughters. No invitation for further discussion or negotiation, just a boundary statement delivered with absolute certainty. I sat down on the couch, feeling suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline from the day finally began to drain away. "They're going to lose their minds," I said. "Probably," Michael agreed, joining me on the couch. "This is going to get really ugly," I continued. "Most likely," he said, surprisingly calm about that prospect. "Michael," I said, looking at him directly, "are you actually okay with this?" He considered the question seriously, not rushing to reassure me with automatic positivity. "I don't know if okay is the right word," he finally said, "but I know I can't continue letting them treat our family this way. I can't keep funding people who don't value us. I can't keep exposing our daughters to relationships that hurt them." He paused, then added more quietly, "I should have done this years ago." The regret in his voice was painful to hear, but also somehow hopeful. Recognizing past mistakes meant believing you could make different choices going forward. "You did it when it mattered most," I said, taking his hand. "You chose the girls. You chose us." He nodded, squeezing my fingers gently. My phone started buzzing then, notifications appearing in rapid succession. I picked it up and discovered that Brittany had posted on social media, not just once, but across multiple platforms and in various groups. Her main Facebook post read, "I was robbed today. My own sister-in-law refused to pay for a full-service party I planned for months. I spent money I didn't have trying to make her daughter's birthday special, and now she's stolen from me. I can't believe family would treat me this way." The post already had dozens of comments, a mixture of supportive messages from people who only knew Brittany's version of events and increasingly skeptical questions from people who had apparently heard other perspectives. Someone had written, "Wait, weren't you the one who served unsafe food to an allergic child?" Another comment read, "If you can't accommodate basic allergies, maybe party planning isn't your business." And someone else added, "She was right to cancel. You endangered a kid. You should be paying her." Brittany was responding frantically to every comment, her replies becoming increasingly unhinged. "It wasn't my fault. She should have brought her own food. I did nothing wrong. She's teaching her daughter to be selfish." I showed the posts to Michael, who read them with an expression of disbelief mixed with resignation. "She's really not helping herself," he observed. "No," I agreed. She's definitely not. Over the next hour, the situation on social media spiraled completely out of Brittany's control. More people commented, many of them pointing out that serving dangerous food to an allergic child at the child's own birthday party was genuinely indefensible. Several people shared stories about their own children's allergies and how frightening reactions could be. One woman wrote, "Your business should be shut down. You're literally dangerous. What if that child had died because you couldn't be bothered to check ingredients?" Another commented, "Never hiring you. Ever. This is horrifying." And someone else added, "The fact that you're defending this instead of apologizing tells me everything I need to know about your character." Brittany kept responding, kept trying to justify and explain, but everything she said only made the situation worse. She was performing a public relations disaster in real time, and apparently nobody in her life was able to convince her to stop posting. By late evening, she had posted one final message. "I'm closing my business. Happy now?" I felt a small, admittedly petty satisfaction reading that announcement. Her business, which she had leveraged to justify her control over Lily's party, which she had used to charge an outrageous amount of money while providing dangerous service, was over. But the real consequences were only beginning. At 9:47 p.m., Sherry called Michael. He rejected the call without listening to any voicemail she might have left. Then Richard called, also rejected. Then Brittany called, rejected again. Finally, all three of them attempted a group call with the contact name Family Emergency displayed in all capitals like shouting in text form. Michael turned his phone completely off. "You don't want to know what they're saying?" I asked. "No," he said simply. "I know what they're saying. They want the money back. They want us to apologize. They want things to go back to how they were. And none of that is happening." He was right, of course. When Michael finally checked his messages the next morning, there were dozens of voicemails and texts, all variations on the same themes. "Where is the money? The bank says the transfer was canceled. This has to be a mistake. Fix this immediately. We relied on that support. You owe us. How could you do this to family?" Michael responded to exactly one message, a single text that said simply, "No mistake." That brief response apparently caused a new escalation, because at 11:47 a.m. our doorbell rang. I approached cautiously, looking through the peephole before opening. Standing on our front porch were Sherry, Richard, and Brittany, all three looking furious and determined. I opened the door slowly, positioning myself in the doorway rather than inviting them inside. "Jessica," Sherry began without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled anger, "you will fix this situation immediately." "Fix what?" I asked calmly. "The money," Richard interjected. "We rely on Michael's support. He can't just cut us off without warning." "He absolutely can," I said. "I spent that catering payment," Brittany added, her voice high and strained. "Do you understand what you did to me? I spent money I didn't have because I thought you were going to pay me. Now I'm in debt because you stole from me." Before I could respond, Michael appeared beside me, and once again he transformed into someone I barely recognized. The Michael who had spent his life avoiding confrontation, who had trained himself to accommodate and appease, who had made himself small to avoid disappointing his family, that Michael was completely gone. "We're done," he said, his voice quiet but absolutely final. "No," Sherry said sharply, stepping forward like she could physically impose her will. "You don't get to be done. You don't get to just walk away from family." "You exploited me for years," Michael said, his voice still controlled but carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "And now it stops." Sherry actually laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Exploited? We're your family. Families help each other. You're being selfish and cruel." "Did you help me?" Michael asked, the question sharp and pointed. "Did you help me with college? Did you appreciate the money I sent you every month? Did you treat my daughters with the same love and priority you show Brittany's children?" Sherry's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. You took money from me every month and acted like it was owed, Michael continued. You favored Brittany my entire life and pretended it wasn't happening. You allowed my daughters to be treated as less important than their cousins and told me I was being sensitive when I noticed. That's not... Richard started, but Michael cut him off. And then Brittany endangered Lily at her own birthday party, and instead of apologizing, you defended her. Instead of acknowledging what she did, you blamed us for being upset. The fury in his voice was controlled but intense, decades of suppressed hurt and frustration finally breaking through the careful containment he'd maintained his entire life. You stole from me, Brittany interjected, her voice cracking. The catering payment was my money. I earned it. You provided a service that endangered my daughter, Michael said, turning his attention to her. You created an entirely nut-based menu for a child with a life-threatening nut allergy. You knew about her allergy and chose to ignore it. That's not service. That's negligence bordering on malicious. I didn't think... Brittany started. No, Michael interrupted. You didn't think. You didn't care. You prioritized your convenience and your vision over my daughter's safety. And then you blamed Jessica when she protected Lily. Sherry tried one more time, her voice taking on a pleading quality. Michael, you're not thinking clearly. You're letting Jessica manipulate you into cutting off your own family. This isn't who you are. You're right, Michael said. This isn't who I was. I was the son who accepted being treated as less important than his sister. I was the brother who funded Brittany's life while paying off loans for the education you refused to help me with. I was the father who watched his daughters be dismissed and deprioritized and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. He paused, then added with absolute certainty, "But I'm done being that person." You can't do this, Richard said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when he expected to be obeyed simply because he was the father and patriarch. I already did, Michael said. You'll regret this, Richard warned, making one final attempt at reasserting control through predicted consequences. No, Michael said firmly, I won't. The only thing I regret is not doing this years ago. There was finality in those words that apparently penetrated even their determination to change his mind. For several seconds, all three of them stood on our porch, staring at Michael like they were seeing a stranger. Then Sherry's expression shifted from pleading to coldness. Fine, she said with icy precision. If this is your choice, you'll have to live with it. Don't come crying to us when you realize what you've lost. I know exactly what I've lost, Michael said quietly, and I know exactly what I've gained. He reached for the door, beginning to close it, delivering the final punctuation to this confrontation. We're your family, Brittany shouted as the door swung closed. Michael's response was quiet but clear. No, they are my family. He gestured toward the interior of our house, toward where Paige and Lily were upstairs, toward the life we'd built together that his family of origin had never fully valued or respected. The door clicked shut with finality. For several long seconds, Michael stood with his palm pressed against the closed door like he needed to physically hold it shut, like he was ensuring they couldn't push their way back in. Then he exhaled slowly, shakily, his shoulders dropping as tension released. I moved beside him, placing my hand on his back. Are you okay? I asked. He turned to look at me, and his expression was complicated. Grief mixed with relief, sadness mixed with peace, exhaustion mixed with something that looked like liberation. I will be, he said finally, and I believed him. Moving forward, building new foundations. The weeks following that final confrontation were surprisingly peaceful, though peaceful in the way that comes after a storm finally passes, rather than the easy calm of undisturbed waters. Michael's family attempted contact several more times, texts, calls, even a letter delivered by mail, but we maintained complete silence. No responses, no engagement, no opportunities for them to reestablish the dynamics we'd finally broken. Michael struggled sometimes. Not with regret, but with processing decades of conditioning that had taught him his family's needs superseded his own. I would find him occasionally staring at nothing, working through complex emotions that couldn't be neatly categorized as simply relief or simply grief. "I keep expecting to feel guilty," he told me one evening, "but mostly I just feel lighter." "That makes sense," I said. "You spent your entire life carrying weight that was never yours to carry." The girls adjusted quickly, more quickly than either of us expected. Paige, when we explained that we wouldn't be seeing Grandma, Grandpa, and Aunt Brittany for a while, simply nodded and said, "Good, they were mean to Lily." Lily's response was equally straightforward. "Do we still get to see our friends?" "Of course," I assured her. "Then I'm happy," she said simply. Children's capacity to accept change and move forward continues to amaze me. They weren't damaged by losing relationships with grandparents who had never prioritized them. They were relieved to no longer navigate situations where they felt less valued than their cousins. We built new traditions, created new celebrations, and structured family time around genuine connection rather than obligation. Holidays became smaller but warmer, focused on the four of us and the friends we chose, rather than extended family who made everyone uncomfortable. Michael's relationship with his daughters deepened profoundly after he demonstrated so clearly that their safety and well-being mattered more to him than maintaining dysfunctional family peace. They trusted him differently now, more completely, secure in the knowledge that he would protect them even when that protection was difficult or costly. And our marriage strengthened too. Watching Michael finally assert boundaries, finally choose us, finally refuse to prioritize his family of origin over his family of choice, created a new foundation of respect and partnership. We were building something healthier together, something not weighed down by toxic relationships and exploitation disguised as family obligation. Several months later, we received a letter from Sherry. It was long, meandering, full of grievances and blame, but ultimately demanded that we apologize and restore the family relationships we'd broken. She wrote that we were teaching our daughters terrible lessons about family loyalty, that we were being selfish and cruel, that we owed them forgiveness and reconciliation. Michael read the letter once, handed it to me without comment, and then placed it in the recycling bin. "No response?" I asked. "No response," he confirmed. "She's not asking for real reconciliation. She's demanding we return to letting them treat us badly." He was right, of course. The letter contained no acknowledgement of what had happened, no apology for endangering Lily, no recognition that their treatment of our family had been hurtful and unacceptable. It was simply a demand that we resume old patterns because they found the consequences of their actions inconvenient. We never responded, and they eventually stopped trying. Looking back on everything that happened, I've spent considerable time thinking about what I wish I had known earlier, what I would tell other people navigating similar family dynamics, what lessons emerged from that terrible birthday party that transformed our lives. First, and most importantly, protecting your children is never the wrong choice, even when that protection makes other adults uncomfortable, even when family members accuse you of overreacting, even when maintaining relationships seems easier than enforcing boundaries. Lily's safety was always more important than Brittany's feelings, than Sherry and Richard's preferences, than avoiding family conflict, but it took a crisis moment for us to fully embrace that truth and act on it decisively. Second, financial exploitation within families is real and damaging, and it often gets disguised as obligation or loyalty. Michael spent years sending money to people who never appreciated it, who treated his generosity as entitlement, who gave nothing comparable in return. That wasn't family helping family. That was family exploiting family. If you're in a similar situation, please know that you're allowed to say no. You're allowed to stop funding people who don't value you. Financial support should be a choice made freely, not an obligation imposed through guilt and manipulation. Third, favoritism in families causes profound damage that extends across generations. The way Sherry and Richard treated Brittany as more important, more deserving, more valuable than Michael didn't just hurt Michael, it hurt our daughters too. Children absorb these hierarchies, internalize these messages about their worth, and carry those wounds forward. If you're a parent, please examine how you're distributing attention, resources, and love among your children. Equality doesn't mean identical treatment, but it does mean that each child should feel genuinely valued and important. Fourth, people who truly care about you will respect boundaries, even boundaries they find inconvenient. Michael's family responded to our boundaries with anger, manipulation, and demands because they'd never had to respect Michael's limits before. They'd trained him to accommodate their needs while dismissing his own, and they were furious when that dynamic finally ended. Real love doesn't demand you set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Real family respects your right to protect yourself and your children, even when that protection creates inconvenience for them. Finally, it's never too late to change family dynamics, even ones that have been established for decades. Michael spent his entire life in patterns created by his family of origin, patterns that positioned him as less important than his sister, patterns that trained him to suppress his own needs. But when his daughter's safety was threatened, he found the strength to break those patterns completely. If you're reading this and recognizing your own situation in our story, please know that change is possible. It won't be easy. It might be painful. It will definitely be uncomfortable. But you deserve relationships that value you, that respect your boundaries, that treat your children with genuine love rather than conditional tolerance. We lost relationships when we set those boundaries, but what we gained was immeasurably more valuable: safety, self-respect, authentic family connections, and the knowledge that we're building something healthier for our daughters. Sometimes the family you build matters more than the family you were born into. Sometimes protecting your children means disappointing adults who never prioritize those children anyway. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from relationships that consistently hurt the people you're responsible for protecting. Lily is 10 now. 2 years past that terrible birthday party. She's thriving, happy, confident that she matters, and that the adults in her life will keep her safe. She doesn't remember all the details of what happened, but she remembers the essential truth. Her parents chose her. Page is 13. Navigating adolescence with the fierce protectiveness she's always shown her sister, and a new understanding that boundaries are healthy and necessary. She watched her father stand up to people he'd feared disappointing his entire life, and she learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting mistreatment from them. And Michael has become someone I barely recognize from the man I married, not because he's fundamentally different, but because he's finally free to be who he actually is, rather than who his family conditioned him to be. He stands taller, speaks more freely, makes decisions with confidence rather than constant anxiety about disappointing people who never valued him anyway. We're building something new together, the four of us, something healthier, stronger, and infinitely more valuable than the toxic family relationships we left behind. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Would I make the same choices again? Without hesitation. Do I have any regrets? Only that we didn't do it sooner. If you've read this far, thank you for taking the time to hear our story. These experiences are difficult to discuss, complicated to navigate, and often isolating because family loyalty is such a powerful cultural value that questioning it can feel like betraying something sacred. But sometimes, family loyalty needs to be questioned, especially when it's being used to justify treatment that would be considered unacceptable from anyone else. Sometimes the most profound act of love is refusing to continue patterns that hurt your children. even when that refusal costs you relationships with people you once hoped would choose differently. I genuinely like to hear your thoughts. Have you experienced similar family dynamics? Have you had to make difficult choices about protecting your children from family members who felt entitled to treat them poorly? Have you struggled with setting boundaries against people who believed family meant unlimited tolerance of mistreatment? Please share your experiences in the comments below. This kind of story thrives on community and connection, on people recognizing their own situations and feeling less alone in their struggles. And if you found value in this story, if something resonated with your own life, or if you simply want to support this kind of honest conversation about difficult family dynamics, please consider subscribing. I'll continue sharing stories about navigating complex relationships, protecting the people we love, and building healthier foundations when the old ones prove toxic. Thank you for being here. Thank you for reading. And remember, choosing your children over dysfunctional family peace is never the wrong decision.